Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on budgeting automation and best practices. My name is Konstantin, and I'm one of the co-founders and co-CEO of Layer. With me today, I have Moritz, who is also co-founder of Layer and our CFO, as well as Pradeep, who's heading our customer success team. During the webinar, we'll cover the following topics. Mo will start, and he'll give you an intro on why budgeting is important in the first place. He will then continue to share with you some of the best practices as to how best prepare for budgeting. And after that, we'll get a little bit more practical, and based on an Excel template, he'll show you best practices on how to create a financial model. With that model, we'll then turn towards the automation part of the webinar, and we'll show you how a Layer can help you streamlining your spreadsheet-based budgeting process and focus on the data collection part. We'll then end the webinar with a Q&A, and we'll hope that you get a lot of insights out of it. Now, with the housekeeping out of the way, I will now hand over the virtual microphone to Moritz, who will kick it off with the intro and tell you why budgeting is important.
So before I kick it off, maybe a very quick intro on me. Worked in finance or finance-related roles all my professional career. So I've seen a ton of financial models, a ton of budgets. I'm very happy to share some of the best practices I've seen in my past. But before we speak about best practices, let's kick it off with a very quick recap on why budgeting is very important. There are a couple of obvious reasons and a couple of not so obvious ones. Let's start with an obvious one: the company's financial health. In essence, you can consider a budget as a financial roadmap. And one of the key purposes of such a financial roadmap is to ensure the company's financial health and the viability of the business. Very straightforward. Second, budgeting at its core is a planning exercise. Every company has goals, and these goals need to be reflected in a company's budget. And accordingly, they define the priorities, the key focus of a company, and the allocation of resources that follows accordingly. So financial health and planning are two very obvious reasons of why budgeting is important. The not so obvious ones are transparency and accountability. So every budget becomes a key steering tool for budget owners once it's shared and distributed. And a budget owner can sit on an overall company level, on a department level, on a country level, or on the level of an individual cost center. But it's super important that a budget is not only a steering tool after it gets distributed, but that budget owners are really involved heavily early on in the process. So they should be part of the discussions around goals and also how to get there. This is going to trigger a ton of discussions, but if you involve budget owners early on in the budgeting process, you're going to have better alignment on where the company is headed, better transparency on the company's priorities, and also, and this is probably even more important, a stronger buy-in, not only by the budget owners, but also by their team members. So what we want to accentuate here is that collaboration really is key, and collaboration is really what turns a budgeting exercise into a very meaningful and valuable process. Let's proceed with a couple of best practices on how to prepare for budgeting in general. Number one, you want to make sure that you're super clear about the company's goals. As mentioned before, a budget is a financial roadmap. Now, if you don't know the company's goals and if you don't know where the company is headed, you're not going to be in a position to define a roadmap. So any roadmap, any budget is going to be meaningless if you don't know and don't understand the company's goals. You don't only need to understand the company's goals, it's also super important that you understand how the business truly works. So on a very high level, you want to be able to answer questions like, how does the company make money and what is needed for that? But obviously the questions that need to be addressed and answered throughout a budgeting process go way beyond that. So a question could be, what does the total number of users look like end of 2022 if we increase marketing spend by 20K in June? Or how are the feature improvements A and B going to impact the conversion rates and the retention rates? So if you're in a position to own a budgeting process and run a budgeting process, you need to have a very solid understanding of the business that you need to have a very complete picture of the kind of questions that need to be answered. Only then you're going to be able to define a meaningful model, and only then you're going to be able to define who needs to be involved as a stakeholder in the budgeting process. And that leads me to the next point. Make sure you involve the relevant stakeholders. So if you're the CFO of a company, if you're the VP Finance, Head of Finance, or whoever, you may be in charge of setting up the model and running and managing the budgeting process. But that does not necessarily mean that you're going to be the person who has all the relevant know-how and all the information in order to be able to populate your model with meaningful input. So make sure you leverage the know-how and the information that's available. It's typically scattered across an organization, across different departments, and it's held by different stakeholders. So make sure you involve them. And that involvement is going to pay off better alignment and a stronger commitment and stronger motivation by the entire organization. Next, you want to think about the output of the model and its structure in advance. So before you open an Excel file, a G sheet, whatever other planning tool you may be using, think about what kind of output you'd expect and what the key purpose of your financial model is going to be. And that should define what it's going to look like in its structure. Closely related, you want to take a very conscious decision about the level of detail that you want to show. So a couple of finance people early in their career tend to try to optimize on accuracy of their model by adding additional layers of detail, granularity, and also additional drivers. But very often doing that does not lead to improved accuracy, but it for sure will result in higher complexity. And as a consequence, setting up a model in the first place and also maintaining it going forward is going to take much more time and it's going to be much more complicated. Lastly, you want to make sure that you plan ahead. So you're going to have discussions with individual budget owners, and there's going to be a ton of alignment with individual budget owners when you're in charge of such a process. But companies usually are very complex organizations and there are going to be interdependencies. So there's also a need for alignment between individual budget owners and across functions and across departments. And that typically means there are going to be a few iterations. So take these lead times into account. Planning takes time, budgeting takes time. And ideally, you don't only have a once in a year budgeting process where a ton of the capacity and resources in the company need to be ramped up and absorbed. But ideally, you do this on an ongoing basis. That way, you make sure that throughout the year, it's really minimum input that is required, only marginal updates on the assumptions, and you can really flatten the effort that it takes to support in such a process from all parts of the organization. Let's move on with a few best practices regarding your financial model. And I'm going to switch between the slide deck and Excel for this part. One remark in advance, I'm going to show you a budget template or a business case template that you're also going to be able to find in a similar version in Leia. So feel free to jump into the application. The domain is app.goleia.io. You're going to see a demo file that's pushed to every new account where you can follow what we're going to show you here during this best practice session.
Is it okay to ask questions in the meantime or later on?
Yeah, it's so probably easiest if we park the questions until the Q&A part. But cool. If it's super urgent questions, feel free to voice them in the chat, and then maybe Konsti can manage. And if it's something that is totally unclear for the majority of the participants, happy to answer the questions throughout this part.
Okay, all good. Thank you.
Perfect. So best practice number one, you want to make sure that you set up your model in a way that allows you to easily maintain it. Two things that we want to highlight here. So first of all, you want to very clearly separate input and output. Otherwise, it gets very messy very, very quickly and very difficult to maintain your budget or your financial model. And second, you want to make sure that in particular, the update of actuals is super easy, right? While assumptions may stay the same over a certain period of time, there will be new actuals with every new period. And so this is something that is a must in order to keep your model up to date and maintain a meaningful model or budget. You want to make sure that updating actuals is super, super easy. I'm going to switch to a spreadsheet file now. And as you can see, this is a very simple model. And again, as mentioned, you can find this in a similar way in the Layer app or on our blog. So it has 2 output tabs, a summary tab and a P&L tab. And it has 4 input tabs, an assumptions tab, an HR tab, software and licenses, and also a tab where the actuals can be entered. It also has an info tab that we inserted for better guidance. And it depicts how the structure of this file looks like. So you can see, and I'm starting on the right-hand side here, there is an HR tab that feeds into the general assumptions tab. There's also a software and license tab that feeds into that tab. And there's another standalone input tab for the actuals. And the actuals and the assumptions tab, again, feed into the P&L tab. So when I look at the P&L, what you can see that this is really formulas only, right? Everything calculates or recalculates and updates automatically based on changes in the input tabs, namely the assumptions tab or the actuals tab. And this is something that you definitely should keep in mind when setting up a model, and you have a very strict separation between input and output. I've also mentioned that it should be easy to update your actuals. So one thing that you should definitely avoid is going to your P&L, and whenever there is an update and there's a new period with actuals, you simply override these nice formulas with hard-coded values. Please do avoid this. Obviously, there's different ways to go about this, but one way we would like to show here is the following. We do have the actuals tab, where new actuals can be entered whenever they are available. And what you see in row 3, the cell here shows either actuals or plan. If actuals are available, that should change to actuals, and accordingly, the P&L will populate with the actuals values. This is implemented in a very straightforward way. When you look at the P&L again, you see for every single cell, there's a very easy and quick check up here. So checks, are actuals available? If yes, pick the numbers from the actuals tab. If not, pick a number from the assumptions tab. Very straightforward, but it's definitely something to keep in mind when setting up your model. It's going to help you a lot in the long run. Next best practice for your financial model. We've mentioned it's super important to involve your stakeholders, and collaboration really is key. So make sure that your model or whatever part of it you want to share, template maybe, is truly understandable and accessible for the people involved. And also keep in mind that the people who contribute to a budget may be people who don't work in spreadsheets or other planning tools all day, every day. And 2 things we would like to highlight here. First of all, make sure you use known terminology. So if, for example, in the general communication, you call a user, and you also do that in your reporting, make sure that in your budgeting file, in your financial model or the templates that you distribute, don't call a user a customer or company or an account. So use consistent terminology, and 2, use clear definitions. There may be things where there's no ambiguity, but wherever there's a need for clarification, make sure that you use definitions, and also operational definitions don't hurt. Right? If you have a conversion rate, for example, that you show somewhere, it doesn't hurt to include in a separate item what the denominator and what the nominator is. Also, one thing, and this is something that many of you may be familiar with, and it's common practice when you've worked at a bank, use color coding. And in a very simple form, this can be implemented as follows. I'm going to go back to the file I've showed you before at the assumptions tab. And I'm only going to look at the first couple of rows here, marketing spend, CPL, and signups. What you see here, there are 2 different color codes, a blue font and a black font. Blue font is used for everything that's hard plugged, and these are assumptions that are going to change and are going to be edited going forward. And in black, we have a formula. So the value may change, but only as a result of changes in the parameters, marketing spend and TPL, but that formula should never be touched. So this is something also to keep in mind. And it's actually a very nice hack to implement this in a very, very easy and quick way. which I'm going to show you now. So this is a little technical, but you don't need to go through every line item, highlight it or mark it, and then pick a color coding. There's an easy way to do that. So use the go-to functionality, hit F5 when you are in Excel, pick specials at the bottom left, and then you can choose constants, uncheck text, errors, and logicals, and really keep numbers only. And when you hit OK, what Excel is going to do is it's going to mark every cell that contains a hard plug. And so you can really implement the color coding in one go, and it really only takes a few seconds, will save you a ton of time when you maintain your file. All right, last thing I want to show you is how to keep your model flexible and scalable. So many of you may work in a dynamic organization where new countries are being entered, new products are going to be introduced, pricing changes, etc. And you want to make sure that it's easy to account for such changes and new directions in your model. So keep it flexible and also keep it scalable. And scalability applies to various parts of a model. We're going to show you a very quick example what we mean by that and how it can be implemented. What I'm showing you now is a different file, just to bring across the point of how scalable formulas and the scalable setup can help you. What I show here is a very simplified model where we essentially depict the top line. So we show marketing spend here, we show CPLs, and we show the number of leads. And we do this in this first tab for a unit A. And that can be a business unit, it can be a country or whatever. And there are different ways to do this, obviously. And what we see very often, and this is the way that you should avoid because it's not scalable, is that people do set this up in a way by directly linking to the respective cell in the assumptions or whatever other part is linked to that. So let's have a quick look at the assumptions tab. What you can see here is the marketing spend assumptions and also the CPL assumptions are outlined for units A, B, and C. In this tab, what you can see is that here I link this directly to the marketing spend of unit A, and I link the CPL directly to the CPL of unit A. If I now want to change from unit A to unit B, or if I want to introduce a new unit tab, maybe a new country P&L, whatever, what I can do is I can simply change this to unit B. And if I set this up in a scalable way, the numbers are going to update automatically. If I were to go with this above approach, I would need to change all the links here. What we've done down here, and this is the interesting part, is we've used an index match function across the range of assumptions. You can also have or use similar functions for that, like a sum product. And what this does really, it checks what unit or what country we're looking at, and then takes the according assumption on marketing spend or CPL. So when I change this from unit A to unit B, what you're going to see is that the lower part is going to update and recalculate automatically, while the upper part stays the same, and I would have to remodel and relink this. So it would be very easy to, in a split second, insert 3 different unit tabs that show the correct values here. Hope that was clear. Obviously, we had to pick a few things that we wanted to focus on. Best practices regarding financial model is something that could be covered in a 2-day program. Hope this was helpful. This concludes this part of our Lunch and Learn session. And I'm now going to stop sharing and hand this back over to Konsti and Pradeep.
Well, thanks, Mo, for showing us how to build a proper financial model. And so what we're going to talk about now is how you can automate a budget process that you might want to run on such a model. And the first question to answer is, what the hell can you actually automate on top of a spreadsheet? And there are probably 2 main dimensions here. And they both evolve around pulling in data. The first one is, if you want to update your file with actuals, for example, you need to pull in data, usually from systems. This might be your data warehouse, this might be marketing data, this might be a data that sits in your CRM. And there's a couple of tools out there that we also use that help you to pull in data automatically. So a tool that you can check out, for example, is Supermetrics. They provide add-ins where you can link marketing data to your spreadsheets automatically. So you don't have to go to your Google account, for example, and download a CSV, convert that, and then copy paste into your model. Another tool that is also helpful if you want to stitch together multiple Google Sheets is a company or a tool called SheetGo. Now, what Layer does, and this is what I'm going to show you now, Layer really helps with streamlining and automating the manual data gathering part. So Mo talked about this briefly before, right? You set up your budgeting file and you have your budget owners, your colleagues, and you want to collaborate with those. And Layer helps you to give your budget owners to access to the respective part of the financial model, and then you can automate the data gathering processes around that. So let me show you how this looks like. So for that, I'm going to jump into the Layer application. We've briefly shared the link to the Layer application before, so if you want to check that out and tag along what I'm doing with the same file that we've just looked at, simply log in and then you can follow what I'm doing in real time. Now, Layer, as I said, is an application that helps you to streamline your spreadsheet-based workflows, and it's really as easy as connecting a Google Sheet or uploading an Excel file to get started. Now, in that case, we already have the file that we've briefly looked at before here in our Layer instance. And to make this a little better digestible, let's assume that we're now starting our budgeting process and we want to give our budget owners access to our file because we want their input. Now, in the case of Excel, that's rather hard to do because we can't do that in Excel. So we have to create multiple standalone file copies that we need to distribute via Slack or email, and then the headache starts. And with Google Sheets, it's the same thing. You can't really do granular user permissioning in Google Sheets as well. So what you do, you create a number of satellite sheets that you need to stitch together. In Layer, you can assign access all in one go. And so what you see here, I've created two workflows where set up data gathering workflows for A, the assumptions tab, and B, the HR updates. So let me show you how this works. So simply select the share button up top, and then you can assign who should work on what part of the file. So let's assume we want to share the software license costs with our CTO because he knows best what we can expect to pay for hosting in the future, for example. So I now selected the tab down here. That's all I need to do. And I'm adding him to our workflow here. And in a split second, I'll choose different email here. We can get going. I'm going to call this hosting costs update. And I'm going to assign a deadline here as well. So what you can do, and this is where the automation comes in, you can assign deadlines to different people, to different parts of your file, so you don't have to go about and chase your colleagues for input. They will be reminded, so you can outsource all of that nitty-gritty stuff to the app. And if, for example, after a budgeting process, you want to keep pulling in that data for your forecasting purposes, for example, you can simply add automation there, and these little workflows get triggered in that cadence that you want. Now, once you've assigned who can work on which part of the file, I'm going to switch back to a view of how this looks like for your colleagues. You can now start to really understand what happens in your file. So let's assume we are now the HR manager who is assigned to update the HR figures. I'm going to change a couple of figures here in the what we call Layer Sheets, which is the Layer built-in browser view, which looks exactly like your underlying file. Here's the message and the instructions that we added to the workflow. We can add a message as well. Hit send, and this is how a collaborator would submit to that budget file. And if we head over to the admin view of the file, we see that this specific workflow that entails the part that we now worked on now has a review needed tag, which tells us that there are changes that we can review. So also here, we don't have to ask and chase our colleagues for input. or have to only react and sit there and see who has submitted input. We get a ping, a notification. And so we really switch from that reactive to this active mode of working. Now, to really understand what has changed quickly, we've added features like color coding, change logs to really speed up the review process. So in a split second, we understand what has gone on in your file. Now, the last step in a layer workflow is the consolidation step. Now, you probably all know that consolidation in the world of Excel and or Google Sheets is a messy thing to do because it usually involves lots of copy and pasting, and that is a thing of the past in layers. So you can easily, on a cell level, accept and or reject changes. In that case, let me accept them, and that will then merge all changes into a master file. So with these simple but powerful workflows, what you can do is based upon your Excel or your Google Sheet, you can assign areas that people should work on directly from one app. You can assign tasks, reminders will be sent out. You can review much faster, and you can do all the consolidation processes directly from within the app without ever needing to copy paste a single value or formula again. Now, you're all invited to check Layer out for yourself. Layer is free. We are still in private beta. So head over there and see whether it can help your spreadsheet-based processes as well. Now, I'm going to head over to the presentation again. Please, Mo, if you could share the screen again, and then we'll go into the Q&A session. So, Marcus, I think you had a question before.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's okay for now. Well, I mean, look, unfortunately I didn't find the link right away, so I joined a little late. And I think in the first introduction we were talking about setting up a model in the first place. And what I'm wondering is, did you say you should set it up in a complex manner or in a simple manner to start with? What's your recommendation here?
Definitely in a simple manner, right? So you need to take a very conscious decision when it comes to the level of detail, right? And I think one common mistake is that you try to make it very detailed in the belief that this is going to increase the accuracy of the model. Yeah. But I think what you need to really keep in mind is what is the key purpose of your model, right? With regards to reporting, planning, and monitoring, etc. And really consider every single line item an investment decision, right? You know it's going to take more effort to set it up. You know it's going to take more effort to maintain it going forward, to keep it updated. So really consider whether that investment is a worthwhile one. So start simple, and whenever additional layers, additional granularity is needed and helpful, add that at a later point in time. But I would always try to keep a model simple in the beginning, because even simple models are quite accurate. And I mean, it's 80-20 there, right? Adding additional layers, adding further granularity often only has slight improvements on the accuracy, but will result in much higher complexity and accordingly higher time and effort needed in order to keep your models up to date.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Also, I feel like in a budgeting process, especially, you want to put responsibilities within departments, right? And so if you start micromanaging that aspect, I don't think that helps in actually diffusing responsibility to departments.
Absolutely. And maybe to add one thing to this, right? What we see a lot is that companies involve stakeholders in order to collect input. But then the collaboration essentially stops, right? So yes, the know-how and the information that sits scattered across that organization is being used, but then there is no feedback and no response back into the organization. So yes, then a final budget exists, it's shared with management, it's shared with investors maybe, but the communication back to the individual budget owners and back into the organization is far from sufficient. And this is something that we've seen a lot in the past as well. And where I would urge everyone managing a budgeting process to really think through how these people can be involved in both ways, in both directions.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right. I'd also like to highlight that we currently have a contest running for everybody who logs into the Layer app, and what you can win there simply by creating a workflow is a year-long sponsorship of the Corporate Finance Institute. So head over there, and for everybody who will sign in November, we will draw a winner who will have access to all the good stuff, all the finance relevant materials from the Corporate Finance Institute. Now, as well, I briefly mentioned the blog in the beginning. Please head there if you want to look for Excel templates. So we have unit economics templates, we have forecasting templates, budgeting templates for you to download for free, and as well as our budgeting survival guide that we've created together with numerous finance leaders from companies like Stack Overflow, TaxFix, or Ada Health, for example. If there are no other questions, then this concludes our webinar. And thank you all for participating, and we'll share the recording with all of you after probably tomorrow. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank
Likewise,
you.
thank you.
Thank you, Konstantin. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you. Bye-bye.